Hi everyone, welcome to Boom Boom Now. I'm Kate and I am really happy that you're here. And before I start talking about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I just want to thank all of you who have been reaching out to me with support and suggestions for future episode topics and all of that. I just really can't tell you how grateful I am. It means so much to me to hear from you. So thank you all so much. So let's jump into it. I want to talk a little bit about the background of ADHD, just for those of you who aren't as familiar with it. I'll touch very briefly on treatment options. I will share with you where I'm at in my own ADHD journey. And finally, I'll give you a little suggestion on how to proceed if you do feel like any of this sounds familiar to you and you may want to get diagnosed. So let's just jump right in. I got diagnosed when I was 60, and honestly, I couldn't believe it. I've worked for years in special education, and I work with kids who have ADHD. And so when my doctor said that he wanted to assess me, I was like, what are you talking about? I would recognize the symptoms in myself. This is my field. This is what I do. On top of working in special education, I have a master's degree in psychology, and I didn't think it was possible that I could have missed my own symptoms. But guess what? I did, and for various reasons that I'll share with you here. Because of my autoimmune disease and the challenges I have with medications, getting diagnosed doesn't mean that now it's easy sailing for me. And I'll talk about some of the complications that I've faced. But I will tell you that one thing that changed for me is that I don't any longer write everything off to age-related cognitive decline. I don't think I'm just an old person kind of losing it. So it's put my mind at ease in that way. And it's also helped refocus my life, honestly. ADHD is something you have throughout life. You don't get it as an adult. You've had it always, you just haven't identified it. And so what that means is when you get a diagnosis at age 60 or whatever adult age you're at, you really look back and so many things come into focus for you. All of the social weirdness I felt when I just talked too much, or when I couldn't stop myself from interrupting people, even though I'm not a rude person, but it just builds up and we blurt if we present in a certain way, and I do, and we interrupt people and we talk too much and too fast and all kinds of things that used to get me in trouble, or the eye rolls, or create social problems for me. I now see through a different lens. And while it doesn't change my experiences in the past, it allows me to be a little gentler on myself. And it allows me to judge my own history a little bit different. And it makes me want to cry, honestly, even talking about it right now. So, I'm not going to cry though. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk to you about some of the statistics. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. They used to separate it into two groups, ADD and ADHD, depending on whether or not the person exhibited with the hyperactive component of it. That's no longer the case. There is only ADHD now. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means that people who have it, their brains are simply different. Their brains are wired differently. It tends to run in families, but doesn't necessarily. The reason that most adults now, like boomer adults especially, and the older end of Gen Xers, the reason we weren't diagnosed is because it didn't actually exist as a diagnosis until 1968. And then even once it made it into the diagnostic manual, it took quite a long time for it to become something that psychologists were commonly assessing for. So we were just bad kids, right? We were just the naughty boys and the girls who talk too much, or the daydreamers, because if you don't present with the hyperactivity, you most definitely present with a kind of spacey inability to sort of focus in the here and now. Sometimes you have all of the above. But anyway, we were just sort of labeled as bad kids or spacey kids or whatever it was. And we were disciplined or ignored or made fun of or whatever. But there was no ADHD label to give us. So then when it started becoming more and more mainstream, they were assessing children, because they know it shows up in children, and they started realizing like, oh, all of those little kids who are driving their teachers and parents kind of bonkers, we might want to look at those kids. But nobody was then looking at the adults, the teenagers, and so we literally fell through the cracks. And adult ADHD, where they started actually more regularly assessing adults, is really only kind of happening now. So we just fell through the cracks, and the fact of it is about 1 in 20 adults have ADHD. Sadly, only about 20% of those people get treated for it. And a big part of that is because they never know they have it. Another reason why adults don't get, especially older adults, don't get assessed is because when we go in presenting with things like, I can't stay focused, I'm really scattered, I can't seem to organize my house, or if you work, you're one of those sloppy desk people and you can't kind of pull it together, and all of those kinds of things. And you start paying more attention to the fact that you're forgetting things, forgetting names, forgetting dates, appointments, whatever it is. And even we don't look at ourselves and go, wait, I've always done that. I have always done that thing. We start going like, oh my gosh, maybe I have some kind of early onset dementia or something like that. I better go talk to a doctor. Fact of it is, we've always done that. I've always had the messy desk. I've always had a million projects going in my house. In my case, they all get done, but boy howdy, getting to that done place is no small thing. I don't know people's names after I've met them 20 times. That's been true my entire life. But as I started getting older, it started freaking me out. Like, I think I have dementia. And that's what happens to a lot of other people. And that's another thing that doctors do. We go in and we say, oh my gosh, these things are happening. And they say, well, you're not as young as you used to be. And they proceed thusly. One of the ways we know that it's ADHD, or that we should be assessed for ADHD at least, rather than just write it off to age-related cognitive decline, is that exactly what I just mentioned. We've always been this way, right? Maybe it's getting a little worse, maybe not, but we've always had it. And a doctor who understands ADHD will start asking you about, well, tell me about how you did in school. Tell me about your social interactions as a kid, because they want to find out, were those symptoms present when you were younger? One of the things that changed in my life that made me notice my symptoms more was when I went out of work on disability first, and then I retired. So I left the structure of a very intense full-time career. That structure kept me reined in a little bit. I'm not the kind of person who won't finish a task or won't meet a deadline, and having that structure imposed by my work helped keep me getting things done. Once that structure was removed, I was on my own, and yikes. That's all I can say about that. The core symptoms, the 3 areas that they're looking for, are inattention, and that shows up a lot more in women, although it shows up in both men and women, boys and girls, but it does present more in women. impulsivity, which seems to be across the board, and hyperactivity, which again shows up more in boys, but it shows up in everyone. For example, you may have already guessed that I have the kind of ADHD that does have the hyperactivity component. So you can probably see it now, right? One other factor that will often present with ADHD that gets written off as gets misdiagnosed, I should say, as a lot of other things, is that we can become very overwhelmed in noisy or busy environments or intense social occasions. It's because our brains are running so fast usually and don't know where to land, so that the more stimulus we have going on around us, the harder it is. So you will sometimes find people withdrawing, getting way too animated in social events, self-medicating in some way to overcome a kind of social phobia that develops around the fact that you often don't act right in these social gatherings. So you see alcohol and drug use sometimes to kind of take down the social anxiety. As far as treatment, mainstream treatment is pharmaceutical. Everybody's heard about kids getting Adderall and Ritalin, I'm sure, and those are still the main drugs prescribed. So it's basically amphetamines, Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse, Concerta, I think it's called. There are some non-stimulant drugs, but I don't think they're prescribed quite as often. And then there are some antidepressants like Wellbutrin that will sometimes be prescribed instead of things like Adderall, sometimes in addition. The stimulant drugs like Adderall and Ritalin you take as needed, but that is more days than not. So basically any day that you need to focus or get anything done, you take your Adderall. Things like Wellbutrin and I believe the non-stimulant drugs you take every single day. I was prescribed Adderall. In some ways I love my Adderall, I do. I do, and I am a person who really steers clear of taking drugs. I try to do everything naturally, but when my brain is really accelerated, I love my Adderall, but I can't really use it, and that's the problem. So that brings me then to where ADHD is competing with my autoimmune. And for those of you who are new to my story, I have undifferentiated connective tissue disease. And one of the ways that manifests is I am hypersensitive to any kind of chemical exposure, including pharmaceutical medications, to the point that I'm not able to take the meds for the autoimmune disease that I have. So life is crazy. So my doctor started me at 15 milligrams. It helped absolutely. I took an Adderall and suddenly everything came down a notch and I was able to be more efficient. The problem was it gave me migraines and vertigo, especially on the days I didn't take it. It was almost like a kind of withdrawal or hangover. So we went down to 10 milligrams. That worked much better. But if I would take it 2 to 3 days in a row, which is completely appropriate based on my doctor's recommendation, I would get the bad symptoms again. Just recently, we've gone down to 5 milligrams. It still works for me. And the symptoms, the negative symptoms, the side effects are by far less. It is much more manageable. But as usual, I'm starting to feel it. I don't know if it's like building up in my system. I don't know what it's doing. But for example, today I have a headache. I did not take Adderall today, but I took it yesterday. And I have a headache, and I always know it's not just a random headache because it comes with a kind of vertigo. So like always, I'm looking for something natural to take its place. I'm trying herbal stimulants. Definitely, I don't see an immediate similar success with them, but I'm giving them time because often herbs they're slower to act. As soon as I either can give a thumbs up or thumbs down on a product, I will definitely do a product review for you. The other thing that I'm doing is really managing my day-to-day life, and I am scaling things down. And that's hard for me because I want to conquer the world. I want to do everything, and I want to do it all right now. So saying no to things, canceling appointments, taking on less when there's some fun project that I want to be involved in, those things are really hard for me. I guess you could say I'm trying to honor how my brain needs life to be. I know that sounds a little airy-fairy and it kind of makes me cringe to even say it, but I don't know how else to put it. So anyway, that's where I'm at. I do want to touch on, if any of this rings a bell to you, and I know it does to some of you, I know it does, because there are too many of us who have it, who didn't get diagnosed. So I know somebody watching this channel, there's like a bell going off in your head right now, right? So what I would suggest is do not go to just any old doctor, but go to a doctor who has experience with adult ADHD. I promise you, it will make all the difference in the world, because otherwise, I promise you, you will leave with an antidepressant and or an anti-anxiety, and you will be told you're not as young as you used to be. As if we didn't already know that, right? Thank you. I don't need to hear that anymore. So go to somebody who knows this condition, knows it in adults, and see where it takes you, because I can tell you right now, my life is only a little better since the diagnosis, but the way I see myself, it's night and day difference. And if you just get even that much relief, where you can look at all of those really bizarre and crazy things you've done over the course of your life, and you can just show yourself a little bit of compassion, I'm gonna cry again. Anyway, I wish you luck. I hope that my journey helps you as you take steps in your journey. This stuff is so important. You being with me while I go through this matters so much, and I hope that me being here for you and being as honest as I can possibly be, I hope it's helpful. That's my intention. And again, people are reaching out to me and showing support and telling me what subjects they'd like to see come up. I'm so grateful. Thank you all so much. Please thumbs up, share the channel, and just be good to yourself and take care of yourself. I love you. Bye.